The economic collapse of Venezuela and the fall of Nicolás Maduro is a multifaceted crisis rooted in a combination of factors, including economic mismanagement, over-reliance on oil revenues, political instability, and corruption. The crisis, which began under Hugo Chavez and worsened under Nicolás Maduro, has had far-reaching impacts on the country and its people, leading to hyperinflation, escalating poverty, disease, crime, and massive immigration. Venezuela's economy has been overwhelmingly dependent on oil revenues for decades, creating a vulnerability to fluctuations in global oil prices. When oil prices declined in the mid-2010s, Venezuela's primary source of income dwindled significantly, leading to shortages of basic necessities like food and medicine. The lack of diversification meant that other sectors, such as agriculture and manufacturing, were neglected. A series of policies implemented by the government undermined economic stability and discouraged investment. Price controls led to shortages and a thriving black market. The government's excessive printing of money to finance its spending led to hyperinflation. Political turmoil, protests, and social unrest undermined investor confidence and discouraged foreign investment. Corruption has been rampant, with widespread reports of embezzlement and misuse of public funds. The government's excessive printing of money to finance its spending led to a rapid increase in the money supply, causing the value of the currency to plummet. This resulted in prices for goods and services skyrocketing, making it difficult for people to afford basic necessities. Sanctions imposed by the United States have restricted Venezuela's access to U.S. financial markets and blocked the purchase of Venezuelan debt. These sanctions have further limited the country's ability to generate revenue and import essential goods. Poverty rates have soared, with a significant portion of the population living in extreme poverty. Many Venezuelans have struggled to afford basic necessities like food, medicine, and housing. Millions of Venezuelans have emigrated to other countries in search of better opportunities, creating a refugee crisis in the region. As of May 2025, over 6.8 million Venezuelans had left the country since 2014. The crisis has led to a decline in living standards, with many people experiencing malnutrition and health problems. There are chronic shortages of medicine and medical supplies. The crisis has led to increased crime rates and social unrest. The government has been accused of human rights violations and suppressing opposition. Nicolás Maduro continued most of the existing economic policies of Chavez. Upon entering the presidency, his administration faced a high inflation rate and large shortages of goods, problems left over from Chavez's policies. Maduro said capitalist speculation had driven high rates of inflation and created widespread shortages of basic necessities. He enacted economic measures against political opponents, who he and loyalists stated were behind an international economic conspiracy. By 2014, Venezuela had entered an economic recession, and by 2016, the country had an inflation rate of 800%, the highest in its history. U.S. forces captured President Nicolás Maduro in a military operation. He and his wife, Cilia Flores, were brought to the United States to stand trial on drug trafficking charges. Venezuela's Supreme Court appointed Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as acting president. President Trump declared that the United States would take charge of Venezuela, expecting that Delcy Rodriguez would work with the United States. The United States imposed sanctions on 4 companies and their associated oil tankers allegedly involved in transporting Venezuelan oil. The future of Venezuela remains uncertain, with questions about a transition to democracy and the role of the United States. The capture of Maduro could have implications for Iran and Hezbollah, as Venezuela has been a trading partner and platform for circumventing Western sanctions. The intervention could lead to deeper instability in Venezuela, with serious regional and global repercussions. PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela, S.A., Venezuela's state-owned oil and gas company, was established in 1975 and fully nationalized in 1976. It quickly became one of the world's most profitable oil companies by the 1990s, controlling the world's largest proven oil reserves, estimated at over 300 billion barrels. Production peaked at around 3.5 million barrels per day in the late 1990s, generating up to 90% of Venezuela's export revenues and funding extensive social programs. However, Under President Hugo Chavez, elected in 1998 and taking office in January 1999, institutional decay began as loyalty to the Bolivarian Revolution supplanted professional competence. Chavez viewed PDVSA's technocratic managers as elitist opponents. A key event was the 2002 to 2003 general strike, led by PDVSA workers protesting Chavez's policies, which halted production. In response, on April 2003, Chavez fired approximately 19,000 to 20,000 PDVSA employees, about 40% of the workforce, including top executives. He replaced them with unqualified loyalists, military officers, and political allies under the PDVSA Nueva initiative. Ramon Espinoza Lobo, a Chavez loyalist and military officer with no oil industry experience, was appointed president of PDVSA in 2004. This purge dismantled decades of expertise. Production plummeted from 3.4 million BPD in 1999 to 2.5 million BPD by 2008, 2.4 million BPD in 2013, crashing to 300,000 BPD by 2019 amid blackouts, corruption, and mismanagement. It hovered around 700,000 to 800,000 BPD in 2023 despite brief upticks from U.S. sanctions relief. Corruption scandals abounded. Between 2004 to 2014, PDVSA lost $11 to $12 billion in Citgo dividends. Executives like Javier Aloa siphoned $1.2 billion via overpriced contracts. Total embezzlement estimates reached $300 billion under Chavez and successor Nicolás Maduro. Refineries deteriorated, e.g., the 940,000 BPD Paraguana complex operated at less than 10% capacity by 2019. Debt ballooned to $60 billion by 2017. Under Maduro, loyalty tests intensified, with colectivos infiltrating operations. This decay contributed to Venezuela's economic collapse. GDP shrank 75% from 2013 to 2021. Hyperinflation hit 1.7 million% in 2018. The story of PDVSA is a stark reminder of how political loyalty, when prioritized over professional competence, can dismantle even the most robust national industries and lead to widespread economic devastation.
Venezuela's hyperinflation crisis is one of the most severe in modern history, marked by a dramatic and sustained increase in prices, erosion of purchasing power, and economic instability. The crisis has had profound social and political consequences, leading to widespread poverty, immigration, and political upheaval. Venezuela's economic troubles can be traced back to the early 2000s and the policies implemented under President Hugo Chavez. Chavez's government nationalized key industries, including oil, and implemented price controls and social programs. While these policies initially boosted living standards for some, they also led to decreased investment, reduced productivity, and increased reliance on oil revenues. When oil prices were high, the government could finance its spending, but as prices declined, the economy became increasingly vulnerable. Hyperinflation officially began in Venezuela in November 2017. Several factors contributed to this crisis. Decline in oil prices. Venezuela is heavily dependent on oil exports for revenue. The sharp decline in oil prices starting in 2014 significantly reduced the government's ability to finance its spending. Money printing. To cover its budget deficits, the government resorted to printing money, which increased the money supply and fueled inflation. Price controls. Price controls, intended to make goods more affordable, instead led to shortages as businesses could not profitably sell products at the mandated prices. This created a black market where goods were sold at much higher prices. Nationalization. Nationalization of industries led to decreased production and efficiency, further exacerbating shortages and economic problems. Corruption and mismanagement. Corruption and mismanagement of state resources further weakened the economy. The hyperinflation crisis has had a devastating impact on the Venezuelan people. Erosion of purchasing power. The value of the Venezuelan bolivar has plummeted, making it difficult for people to afford basic necessities like food, medicine, and clothing. Poverty and hunger. Many Venezuelans have been pushed into poverty, and hunger is widespread. Immigration. Millions of Venezuelans have fled the country in search of better economic opportunities and living conditions. This has created a refugee crisis in neighboring countries. Collapse of public services. The healthcare system has deteriorated, with shortages of medicine and equipment. Infrastructure has also suffered, with frequent power outages and water shortages. The Venezuelan government has implemented various measures to address the hyperinflation crisis, with limited success. Currency reforms. The government has launched several new currencies, including the sovereign bolivar and the digital bolivar, in an attempt to stabilize the economy. These reforms have involved revaluing the currency and removing zeros from its face value. However, these measures have not addressed the underlying causes of inflation. Price controls and subsidies. The government has continued to implement price controls and subsidies, which have further distorted the economy and led to shortages. Cryptocurrency. The government launched its own cryptocurrency, the petro, supposedly backed by oil reserves. The petro was intended to circumvent international sanctions and raise revenue, but it has not gained widespread acceptance. Dollarization. In recent years, the government has unofficially allowed the use of US dollars in transactions. This has helped to stabilize prices in some sectors of the economy, but it has also created a dual currency system. Continued economic contraction. Venezuela's economy has contracted for several years, although the rate of contraction has slowed in recent times. Easing of price controls. The government has gradually eased some price controls, which has helped to increase the availability of goods. Increased dollarization. The use of US dollars has become more widespread, and many businesses now accept dollars. Humanitarian crisis. The humanitarian crisis continues, with millions of Venezuelans in need of assistance. Hugo Chavez, as president from 1999 to 2013, his policies laid the groundwork for the crisis. Nicolás Maduro, Chavez's successor, who has presided over the hyperinflationary period. Simón Bolívar, the historical figure after whom the Venezuelan currency is named, symbolizing the nation's aspirations and struggles.
Venezuela's recent history is marked by a severe economic and humanitarian crisis that has led to widespread hunger and mass migration. Several factors contributed to this crisis, with policies implemented by the Venezuelan government playing a significant role. Under the leadership of Hugo Chavez and later Nicolás Maduro, the Venezuelan government implemented strict price controls on basic goods and nationalized key industries, including oil production and agriculture. The intention was to make essential items affordable and redistribute wealth. However, these policies backfired spectacularly. Price controls led to shortages as businesses couldn't cover production costs, and nationalization resulted in mismanagement and decreased efficiency. Venezuela became heavily reliant on oil revenues, neglecting other sectors of the economy. When oil prices crashed in the mid-2010s, the country's economy was devastated, leading to a collapse in imports, including food and medicine. In response to the economic crisis, the government printed more money, leading to hyperinflation. The bolivar, Venezuela's currency, became virtually worthless, making it impossible for ordinary citizens to afford basic necessities. Corruption within the government and state-owned enterprises diverted resources away from essential services, exacerbating the crisis. While it's contentious to claim hunger was deliberately used as a policy, the consequences of the government's actions had a devastating impact on food security. Critics argue that the government prioritized political control over the well-being of its citizens. The mismanagement of the economy, combined with the suppression of dissent, created an environment where hunger became widespread. Some analysts suggest that the government used access to food as a tool for political patronage, favoring supporters while denying resources to opponents. However, the extent to which hunger was a deliberate policy is debated. Faced with hunger, poverty, and a lack of opportunities, millions of Venezuelans have fled the country in recent years. This mass migration represents one of the largest refugee crises in the world. Neighboring countries like Colombia, Peru, and Brazil have absorbed the majority of Venezuelan migrants. But these countries are also struggling to provide adequate support. The influx of Venezuelan migrants has strained resources in neighboring countries, leading to social and economic challenges. Healthcare systems, schools, and housing are under pressure, and there have been reports of increased crime and xenophobia. The Venezuelan migration crisis is a humanitarian disaster, with many migrants facing hunger, disease, and exploitation. International organizations are working to provide assistance, but the scale of the crisis is overwhelming. Hugo Chavez, president of Venezuela from 1999 to 2013, implemented socialist policies that laid the groundwork for the economic crisis. Nicolás Maduro, president of Venezuela since 2013, continued Chavez's policies and presided over the country's economic collapse. The period from 2014 to the present marks hyperinflation, economic collapse, and mass migration. This video aims to explain the complex interplay of economic policies, political decisions, and social consequences that have led to the crisis in Venezuela. It's important to present a balanced perspective, acknowledging the different viewpoints on the causes of the crisis and the role of the government.